All right, class, for this lecture, we are going to look at learning disabilities. And so when it comes to any type of disability, mental, disorder or developmental delay, it's always important that we have an understanding of what we consider to be healthy versions of that. So what do we consider to be the gauge? And you have to remember everything in life exists on a spectrum, and as human beings, we're all individuals. So, when we denote healthy learning, we're looking at what is most optimal for, helping the most people. And when we see individuals that there's something a little off there, then, we want to be able to know how to help those individuals, right, guys? So basically, a learning disorder is when the brain takes in and works with information, but there's just something wrong with the connection there. So it's, they're not absorbing and working with that information in what we consider those typical healthy ways, okay? And so learning disorders, definitely, the three big ones are they impede children, especially his ability to read, write, or do things like simple math. And then, use or understand language, socialize, or learn other skills that don't involve words. So, those are pretty much the criteria for learning disorders. Oh, and guys, and if you haven't, make sure you watch the other video on how we learn so that you have that idea of those, those healthy, typical ways that we go about denoting that, okay? So most of the time when someone has some type of learning disorder, they seem to also have average or above average intelligence. So there's some kind of gap there between these expected skills they're supposed to do and the way that they're performing in school. And this also relates to mental health status, because a lot of mental health disorders we see, especially in childhood, are going to be behavioral related, and they're going to impact how the child is doing in school. So those of us that want to go into education and work with children, those of us that want to go into psychology and work with children, it's once again, it's important that we are able to understand what the healthy development is and understand what the unhealthy development is, so that we are able to provide the most guidance and help possibly, because everybody deserves to everybody deserves to have good self-esteem, good concept, good self-concept, good self-efficacy, and live a successful and positive life, right? And so when we note these disabilities along the spectrum of human behavior, that's all it is. It's just figuring out how to accommodate to human diversity, and also our individual and kind of uniqueness that we possess, right? At the same time, though, we are these social creatures that, if we didn't have each other, we probably would not survive. That we tend to say that in past terms and be like, well, yeah, and prehistoric times, humans wouldn't have survived without being in the group and helping each other out. But I'm like, you look around at a lot of other animals, and they definitely do better in a group. Goats, ha ha! You guys didn't think I was going to talk about them, huh? People like to keep goats as single pets, and it's kind of okay, but really, goats are social herd creatures, and they thrive when they are in their group and they got all their homies with them, right? And that's how we are as human beings. And so, being able to figure out all of our special skills and gifts, and figure out how we put them into society, into a context that we're all working and growing and learning together. And it's what I said there. It's being able to identify and accommodate for diversity and individuality, all right? And sometimes learning disorders in childhood exist before they get diagnosed. So that's also important when we're dealing with any kind of disability, is that we want to be able to catch it as quickly as possible, because the earlier you can catch it, then the more able you are to get the help that the child or the individual needs. And then that then just sets them up for success for the rest of their life. And there's anxiety and stress and depression involved with that, not just probably on the kids side, but on the parents and other people's side involved too. So the quicker you can catch it, the quicker you can learn to identify the signs so that you can reach out to the appropriate professionals to get the kids the help, the better. All right, so when it comes to the different types of learning disability, oh, sorry, this should have been the screen I was on when I was just talking there, so I'll give you guys a minute. So just to recap what we just said, so, learning disability, we know it's when the brain is working with and trying to process information, but there's just something off with the neural connections, mostly affects reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? That's what we used to call like the three R's of education way back in the day. And how funny is that? Only one actually starts with an R. Like, what does that tell you about the education system? And of course, learning disorders also affect socialization type skills, and then other skills that don't involve words. So, mechanical skills, cognitive skills, creative skills. If you think about Gardner and his multiple intelligence theory, as in, somebody may be really good at math, but they really suck at playing the piano. Whereas you have individual B over here, and they're really good at like playing the piano, but they cannot do math. And so once again, it's about working together and just finding that flow so that everybody is utilizing their gifts, right? And so when we talk about a learning disability, it's really this kind of overcompass, like mushroom cap, umbrella type, a type term, phrase, I guess you could say, that we are using, because there are several types of learning disabilities. And, just like with developmental delays and mental disabilities. So the most common learning disorder is dyslexia, and that is when there's something going on with the languaging processing part of the brain, and so it causes people to not read words like they're written, like words will be inverted. It always makes me think of like pig Latin. If you guys, I was never good at I'm never been good at pig Latin, but you're supposed to like the last letter of the word, you change it with the first and put the first on the last. And it's something about flip flopping the words around. And so that's kind of what people with dyslexia, when they go to read a book, it looks like pig Latin in their brain. I think that's a really good analogy. And then, that's going to affect your ability to speak correctly, to write, and, to actually comprehend and understand what those words mean. So that's going to cause a delay in, your vocabulary and a lot of your cognitive processes, and social, emotional too, because if you're a kid and you're seeing this pig Latin in your brain, and you have to read out loud and it takes you longer, that's going to cause a lot of stress and anxiety on the child, right? Because he's go, oh no, everybody's going to make fun of me. Oh no, it's going to take me so much longer to figure out how to read this out loud in the classroom. And so, once again, it's our jobs to be able to identify that, to see those signs, so that we help decrease those types of anxious situations in an educational setting. And, a lot of that comes down to pedagogy too, and just teaching styles, and human behavior, being able to read people. And for the most part, I say that schools do pretty good. There's definitely a lot of testing that can go on in schools, but I think it's, you got to, as the teacher, you got to be the one, or the parents, kind of stand up and initiate that process, right? Then we have, I'm probably going to butcher these other two, so bear with me, guys. Dysgraphia. And this is when people have difficulty putting their thoughts into writing because they're just having some kind of issues with, language, spelling, grammar, reading comprehension, and those other, oh wait, hold on, wrong one. Spelling, grammar, memory, and critical thinking, excuse me. So dysgraphia is when people have issues with vocabulary, spelling, grammar, memory, and critical thinking. And a good way to spot this is poor handwriting. And so that then leads to other types of disability, like especially spatial awareness, motor skills like motor planning. And so it makes it really hard for an individual to write down their thoughts. So there you go again. If you have assignments for your students where they have to do some writing, you're gonna, pay attention to the way they're writing and what they're saying, because you'll see that, especially when it comes to writing, guys, red flags are very apparent, right? All right, this is one I'm going to butcher. Dyscalculia, I believe, or dyscalcula, something like that. It's math dyslexia. So just like with regular dyslexia, where it's all these flip flops of the words and the sentences and stuff, with math dyslexia, we'll go with the simple term there for dyscalcula. It must be dyscalcula because calculus, right? Is it's the same thing. So people have trouble with numbers, concepts, reading. They have trouble reading a clock. They have trouble reasoning mathematically. Numbers and concepts related to, math is kind of a little beyond their comprehension. And I've had trouble. I've always been a person that has struggled with math in my life, and I've had some. That's probably the only class. That's absolutely the only class and subject that I've ever failed multiple times, because I'm just more, I just use more of my other brain. So, as I get older in life, I've taught myself like different kind of little math tricks so that I've improved those skills. Like I did a lot of archaeology, and so I would like count miles and track my just in tracking my mileage for archaeology, it really helped improve my math skills. So I guess my point of sharing that story is that when it comes to math dyslexia, you just have to find little mnemonic tricks and you know little like games that you can get the person to play. So then that kind of, that's going to make it more fun, because if you got max dyslexia, then math is absolutely anxious and terrifying. And so when you break it up and into a game like setting, you're going to make that person more comfortable, and then you're kind of interacting with other parts of their brain too. So the more neural connections we have going in our brain, the smarter it makes our brain, which in turn makes us smarter, right? And then that's how we get to be those positive agents of social change. All right, next we have auditory processing disorder. And this is when people have difficulty processing sounds and other auditory information. And so, that can cause confusion with the order of how words sound, or they may not be able to be distinguish between the sound of like the teacher talking and lecturing compared to like other background noise in the classroom. So the teacher's talking and there's a clock ticking. Other kids are writing down notes. Some kids are probably swinging their feet, maybe kicking the desk. Somebody's tapping, like all those little background noises and provide a lot of distraction. And so, that's definitely going to affect how that individual student is able to, take in and process the information that he or she whatever needs to be able to function in society, right? Because as I said, as human beings, we're social creatures, so we want to be able to function in society, and we also want to be able to make sure that we are accommodating and just basically just looking out for each other, right? And then we have language processing disorder. And so this is just difficulties with processing spoken language. And so people then have difficulty with attaching meanings to sound groups. Sentences, stories, representing words, and that's as human beings, language is one of the main ways that we function, right? And so it's definitely important that, and not, not speaking it so much, I guess, so much as just that, back to that idea, that processing the information, right? And then last, we have visual perceptual, visual motor defect, and people will have difficulties with motor activities, hand-eye coordination. So they often will, like when they're reading something, they'll lose where they're at on the page, and so then you have to go and start over, and usually that could create like stress and anxiety and frustration. And then sometimes there's going to be this unusual eye movement when reading or writing. There'll be confusion with similar looking letters. There's going to be some difficulty in getting around, like navigating the environment. And you're going to see motor skills that are impaired. So, they may not be able to hold their pencil or crown right, or they can't really use scissors, or, can't squeeze the glue or put the glue on or something like that, right? All right. So when it comes to symptoms of learning disorder, once again, we have to remember development and human behavior exists on a spectrum. So, these are symptoms, and what we're looking for are the most extreme behavior. So, the most extreme expression of these symptoms, because lots of us as kids had trouble with reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's something we have to learn as humans. And as little kids and our brains are still developing, we all struggle with it at one point or another. So, we define a mental disorder as when your behavior is so abnormal, it's preventing you, or just behavior that is preventing you from functioning in society, right? And like I said, though, but at one point or another, we may all experience that. And so it comes down to duration, in the sense that if it's something that is constantly inhibiting somebody from functioning, that's then when we get to that other side of the spectrum and we're in that disorder category, right? And also, when it comes to that spectrum on the disability disorder side, we're looking for a cluster. So, oh, Tommy had trouble memorizing the poem this week. Oh, Tommy must have autism. I don't know, guys. I'm making this up, but I think you'll get my point. Just because that happened to Tommy one week doesn't necessarily mean that we should be on alert. And then, one and two, maybe Tommy didn't remember the poem this week because there's something going on in his family life that is interfering with his ability to learn, right? You're going to see that a lot working with children, be it psychologically or educationally. All right, guys. So I'm not gonna go. Oh, so quickly. I'll go through these quickly. All right. So poor memory, difficult focusing, short attention span, difficulty with reading and writing. There's some inability to distinguish between sounds, letters, numbers, difficulty sounding out words, tendency to use numbers or letters in the wrong sequence, difficulty with time telling, some difficulty with left and right, tendency to reverse words, difficulty grasping certain words and concepts, and then disconnect between words and meaning. And so it's when you say one thing that you mean another. And, a lot of people that have poor educations actually display that symptom, right? Difficulty expressing thoughts and emotion, poor hand-eye coordination, delayed speech development, disorganization, trouble with listening and following instructions, inappropriate responses, restlessness and impulsivity, a tendency to act out. So we're seeing some kind of behavioral or conduct disorder, um, difficulty with discipline, resistant to change, inconsistent performance, and those are behavioral contact disorder type things, so the mental disorders to look out for too. All right, so when it comes to diagnosing learning disabilities, that is, of course, something that only a licensed professional, healthcare professional, psychiatrist, because the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist is that both diagnose mental disorders, but only the psychiatrist can prescribe medication, and medication is used a lot when it comes to mental disorders and learning disorders, especially with children. That's why there's a shortage of Adderall, ADD medicine right now, because people have been overprescribed and over medicated on those types of things. And interestingly, I just saw that they're trying to change the law so that now psychologists can prescribe medication. I'm like, ooh, that sounds a little scary. And of course, one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to look at that performance. How has the student improved or not in the course of, their progress report in the course of 4 weeks, 6 weeks, right? And then you're going to look at their testing. What are the scores that they are making on testing. And then, if you think that there's some kind of issue going on there, there are going to be different type. There are going to be more types of testing that are going to be involved, and they're going to be physical and neurological tests, and there's also going to be, medical history, because that's something else to consider when it comes to things like mental illness, developmental delays, or learning disabilities. That it could mean something's going, well, it absolutely means that there's something wrong going on in the brain, but sometimes it can be it could be something like cancer, a tumor that is causing that disconnect there, and a simple surgery can correct it. Whereas then you have other things like a chemical, and the neural connections aren't going together right. The chemicals aren't interacting right, and that requires a little more professional help and diagnoses there. Or maybe it's just something, which would be that it would be something neurological, is like those, like with epilepsy. What epilepsy means is you got to think of your brain like an electric circuit, and like when you have a power outage, it's because that electric circuit, something happens and it gets disconnected, right? Your power line goes down, you don't have any more electricity going to your house, so your power goes out. That's the same thing with seizures. It's that connection. It's like you have this just disconnect, like the power goes out in your brain there for whatever amount of time. And then, as always, we also want to remember, and I think I've had some good examples of that, different symptoms can also exist. And we always want to think about that in, diversity and individuality when we start getting into dealing with, this disabilities disorder side of human behavior. And for when it comes to treating learning disabilities, there are a few techniques that are employed, and like I said, medication is one of them. But we really have to be careful with that because there's just so much over medication of our country that and so many kids that are probably diagnosed with ADD, and they really just need to go outside and run around in the woods and like learn to read sitting under a tree, because that's what's going to stimulate them, not being forced to sit in a room with four walls, even if it does have windows. But they got to sit there and they got to do this specific thing at this specific time and get this routine. That's going to be very boring for some people, and that'll cause them to act out. That'll cause their performance to be poorly. So, that is something with these I think you said Montessori type schools, and there is a move across the country to do more like student learner focused type learning. And COVID make that a little difficult because there's move because now everybody's doing more like homeschooling type stuff and more like online learning type stuff. So that'll make, that's going to prove a challenge to educators and psychologists. And if we keep that up, adjusting to how we really figure out those disorders and getting those kids the help they need. Interesting to think about, right? And then special education, if the disability is preventing normal functioning enough, then they need education that's outside of the normal classrooms by trained teachers, right? My eldest sister worked in special ed for a while there. And then, of course, like psychotherapy, psychology can help too. And, sometimes psychotherapy, like I said, there's some kind of emotional issue. There's something socioeconomic. Maybe there's abuse in the family. Maybe the kid has been molested. And, so psychotherapy is going to help to be able to identify the emotional side of it, and then help assist in the process of learning by giving them the emotional learning tools they need, coping skills. And then there are things like speech therapy, language therapy. There are things they can do with people's eyes. Therapies they do. I can't think exactly what it's called, but with eyes, and it can helps you learn how to focus on things. Sometimes meditation. That's probably something that's more a little novel still here in America. But at the same, I'm saying that because I live in Tennessee, guys. They're like meditation in school, huh? It's funny they let me bring the goats up to do yoga and cuddle the kids. But meditation, because that's a good way to calm your brain and to help you focus. And then support groups, because once again, as social creatures, it always behooves us to have a support system and to be able to share with others as well as listen to others. Because we often think that communicating is all about the words that we say, and we have two ears and one mouth, so that we talk less and we listen more, because listening is the more important communication skill there, right? All right, so that then leads us to our disorders of childhood and adolescence. And just like I've been saying, we're looking for those behaviors and those mental and emotional like states that aren't considered along the normal functioning side of human behavior. These are the disorders on the side of the spectrum that prevent that normal functioning, okay? And development, of course, environment is going to play a role, and a lot of disorders in childhood actually do go undocumented. And once again, culture and social economic levels play a role in that. So things like, let's say, there seems to be evidence that among our African American or Black communities that schizophrenia is very prevalent, but a lot of those kids are not diagnosed properly. And then that ties into, because maybe the schools or the parents don't have the resources to get the child help. And then, of course, there are always those stigmas that are associated with mental disabilities. And, the same with in the Asian cultures, they're not really going to highlight a disability or, like a mental disability. And I mean, even with, us white people, like it's a shame, it's embarrassing. There's a stigma. Oh, if you have a mental disorder, or someone and your family has a mental disorder, then something's wrong with all of you. Or what's wrong with you? So a lot of it has to do with once considering all those factors, and then also stepping back and taking the perspective of like, okay, we're all human. We all have the same range of emotions and behaviors and thoughts and whatever. And, how do we best accommodate and work with all of our gifts, right? So, when it comes to the percent of children, and this is like in a year, is what this pie chart represents, that are diagnosed with mental disorders, we see it's 21, 32, 37% of the population, if I did my math correctly there, math dyslexia. And then, that leaves the rest of the population as what we consider normal. Now, when we look at these diagnoses for mental disorders, we see that it's broken up into different pie pieces, right? So most of them are what we consider mentally impaired. So it would be maybe something like kid just has a list. They just have a little speech impediment, or, they have like mild dyslexia or something, like minimal. And then when we start getting into more of those high autistic ranges, we see that significant impairment. Maybe these are the kids that are really anxious, and maybe they go and they sit in a corner and they might hum or sing to themselves, or they kind of do things with their hands. Maybe they rock or something. That would be considered significant, because it's inhibiting their ability to go out and function with the group. And so there's a lot of different types of speech and behavioral therapy, and just all sorts of therapy that goes along with that. And then we have the extreme impairment. And I put the link at the end of this lecture, but there is this great video documentary on YouTube, and it's called The Dangerous Few. It's The Dangerous Few, or A Dangerous Few. And it's these cases about these kids that are total psychopaths, you guys. I mean, it's like chilling to watch. There's one, the little boy, and I have no, I've tried to look up what happened to these kids. I'm like, surely they've killed somebody by now. Because I'm telling you, man, these kids are freaky, you guys. The little boy, he was like at 3 years old, he put his cat in the microwave. I'm like, oh my God, how does a 3-year-old know to do something like that? And just like crazy stories. And then they got this little girl. The little boy was one that really freaked me out, but they got a little girl too, and how she's like a baby and trying to kill her or kill people, I think, or something like, so that would be that 5% extreme impairment. And then, that's like the top tier of that 5%. And it's really probably, even out of them, it's only like 2%. In this case of extreme impairment, it would be like, oh, I can't think of a specific disease, but those really disabilitating diseases where like people have to be in uh, wheelchairs, or maybe even like the bed, they have to lay in bed. Like I said, those are like neurological type disorders, but those would be considered severe too. I'm so sorry I can't think of one example off the top of my head. All right. And then, so pervasive developmental disorders, or what we like to call autism spectrum disorders, are some of the most common learning disabilities that are being diagnosed. And then I would say, like, once again, ADD would be the next one that we see diagnosed a lot. So, this is when we see those qualitative impairments in verbal and non-communication. you know, they do not include hallucinations or delusions, though. And because of schizophrenia, it's important to include that. Children could show symptoms of schizophrenia as young as like 5 years old. And so when we look at the DSM, which is the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that's like the psychology mental disorder Bible, right, guys? And so we look at that, it's that qualitative impairment in social interaction, communication, restricted, stereotyped interests and activities, delays or abnormal functioning in major areas as young as age 3, and maybe even before that. We see about, just some statistics here, 2 to 20 cases and about 10,000 kids. And autism is actually 5 times more common in girls than it is boys. It was first diagnosed by Kanner, Kanner, and Kenner looked at infant autism, extreme isolation, inability to relate to people, which would be attachment style, psychological need for sameness, and significant difficulties with communication. So, in studying babies that showed those symptoms, it came up with, autism spectrum disorder. There's a lot of lack of social interaction, verbal and non-verbal communication. Echolalia may be present, and that's kind of like they'll parrot what you say, or they make like noises instead of talking. They're like a bird, like a parrot. Ah, and do stuff like that. One of my nephews has a little autism, and he definitely has that echolalia. Now that he's getting a little older, it's not as bad, but we saw that there in like his pre-pubescent stage. He was so bad about doing that. And then they're going to have a lot of repetitive behaviors, especially spinning. There seems to be something about autism spectrum disorder and spinning, a spinning motion. They are also, we could have savants. Some of you guys may not be old enough to remember the old 80s movie called Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. And in it, Dustin Hoffman, they were brothers, and Dustin Hoffman played an autistic. He was autistic, but he was like this genius with like numbers. That's all I remember about the movie. And I was still kind of young, and I was preteen, growing up in the 80s. But from what I remember, I think the Tom Cruise's character, like, used the Rain Man character to like go and bet and make a lot of money. And of course, it's a movie, so everything went wrong there. And then things like lack a theory of mind during development, which means that they really don't understand their own mistakes and they can't appreciate other people's mental state. So you can't really relate to what other people are doing or going through. And there are different medical conditions that can produce symptoms of autism. So, once again, it's always important to get those thorough physical and neurological and psychological testing done because, once again, it could be something like a tumor that could help correct it. That could help correct it, excuse me. And then when it goes to other developmental delay disorders, we give that at a rate about 22 and 10,000. And there's some controversy there because these other disorders, they show signs and symptoms of overlapping with autism and neurological disorders. And really, that's not quite uncommon when it comes to mental disorders. Most mental disorders are what we call comorbid, which means that, you're not just depressed. You probably have like an eating disorder and depression. It's usually more than one thing going on because as humans, we're complex and we're made up of many different things, right? In our mental states, we know from Freud and Jung, we have different parts of our brains as far as our consciousness and our mental states go, and just our thinking of who we are and how we relate to the rest of the world, right? So we have to always take all of that into perspective. And then, pervasive developmental disorders, Rett's disorders, and Asperger's are the most prominent. And then there are some that are not otherwise specified, which kind of means like there are probably some kind of different types of symptoms going on there, and there's just not enough data collected to actually truly classify it as a mental disorder. Because to get in the DMS, there does have to be a lot of research and a lot of a lot of seeing these signs and symptoms. You don't just get those by going into a classroom for a day and being like, well, Jimmy has this and Bobby has that and Susie is this and Carl over there is normal. It's a process that you have to go to. And along with autism and pervasive developmental disorders, we also have internalizing disorders, anxiety, trauma, stress disorders, PTSD, and the non suicidal self injury. And so, those internalizing disorders, we can kind of think of them as mood disorders because it's going to be something emotional that's going on inside. That's then, it's going to be anxiety, it's going to be depression, it's going to be trauma. It may mean that there's sexual abuse involved, and it can also lead to substance abuse, suicide, and then the other side of sexual abuse where people become over promiscuous because that's kind of damaging to your body too, especially if you're still a much younger person, right? And then anxiety, trauma, and stress are the most common mental disorders in childhood and adolescence at 32% of the population. And, a lot of it has to do with socialization, friendships, cohorts, peer groups, family environment. And that's one of the things of where the internet has kind of been bad because we see these incidences of online bullying and then, a lot of kids committing suicide, especially when we get to the LGBT community. And so that's very alarming and definitely questions or just school environments in general and just how kids are being taught to relate to each other and to be compassionate and understanding for each other. And I would suspect that those kids that are doing the bullying, a lot of the times they have very, very terrible home lives, because kids learn the behaviors from what they see around them. And so PTSD can have, happens with anybody. Whenever you have a very traumatic event, then you're going to have trauma. You're going to have some kind of lingering trauma. Guys, it's spring here in Tennessee in 2023, March, and Nashville just had a school that was shot up. So there's a lot of those kids and the faculty and even the first responders, the police officer, and then the larger community. There's a lot of PTSD going on in Nashville right now, and people trying to find, a sense of safety and a sense of community, and then just, trying to just reach out and work with and love each other, which is kind of what we should do as human beings. But at the same time, you know, people who do bad things, you just can't love them and let them get away with being ugly. Some personalities truly do have mental disorders and just cannot play with the rest of us, and that's okay. You got to wish those types of personalities well and keep moving on and doing positive and productive things in your own life, right? And that's a great segue and to look at externalizing mental disorders. So these disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders. And I would suspect that this influx of mass shooting we are seeing in society, that this is the mental disorder that is going on. We talk a lot when these incidents happen, we talk about a lot about healing, a lot about mental health, a lot about gun control, and we don't really talk about solutions. It's like, okay, so this happens. What was this? What's really the solution to prevent it from happening? And that's where safety becomes a really, safety can be like George Orwell, 1984. It's like, do we sacrifice our freedom so that the government has total control over every aspect of our life, so that we can wake up every day and feel safe, you know or do we find other ways to stop creating these dysfunctional families and dysfunctional individuals? I don't know, guys, just something to think about, something kind of interesting that it makes me think about too. And then, go back to this idea of early intervention. These kids that are doing these shootings are so young. It's like, where is the failure in our education system and in our mental health resource system? And that latter one's easy. It's because there's a lack of mental health resources. And same thing with education. Teachers are underpaid and overworked, and there are classrooms in this country where the teachers have way more students than they know what to do with. And so that does make it hard. Or it could be that the teacher points out on this conduct disorder and the parents are flippant and the parents don't care. So once again, being human, we have so much. Everything is a spectrum, and it's an evolving spectrum, though, because we're all here on a learning, growing journey, and we all can learn how to be our best selves, and to get the help we need when we're not being our best selves. All right. And a lot of time with these external disorders, that's all it needs: early intervention. Maybe not necessarily beat the crap out of your kid, but there's not really much. Spanking may have some positive effects. Maybe that's why we're seeing all these mass shootings. There haven't been enough kids getting their little butt spanked for being bad. Who knows, guys? I don't know. But once again, it's certainly interesting to think about and to discourse about, because ultimately, psychology is about how can psychology help. And so that's really always the perspective that I come with the ideas and thinking about all these different things that go on in life. It's like, how can psychology help that? Because I believe psychology can help that. Carl Jung said the only evil is man, and we need more psychology so that we have more understanding of ourselves, and then in turn, that allows us to have more understanding, compassion, and respect for others. So, these disorders are controversial because sometimes it's hard to distinguish them from normal defiance and non-compliance. And once again, this is where the understanding yourself and being able to understand others comes into play. And you're going to have those hard-nosed people that are in the hippie kid, and they're just not going to get along no matter what happens. And it is normal for kids to rebel and act out, especially in the adolescent stage. But, when it comes to destroying people's stuff, when it comes to like taking anger out on other people, when obviously now stockpiling guns. Hey, dogs! No! Dogs are chasing one of my goats. And buying guns now, which concerns me too. I'm like, where are these kids getting guns? And doing those type of things that definitely somebody should have a red flag going. That's like, yeah, that's more than just typical teenage rebellion. Dogs! I'm over here, girls. All right, so oppositional defiant disorder is when you see this negative, argumentative dog. Stop. Argumentative, hostile behavior. There's going to be like temper tantrums. They're just going to argue and defy and complain about everything, and especially when it comes to authority. But we don't see a lot of serious violations of societal norms. So probably just no destruction, just that really just negative, just bad mouth kid. And we see that often when there's some kind of intervention that would do resolve those symptoms. Intermittent dysplosive disorder, this is when we start seeing serious impairment, and it's underdiagnosed and under treatment. And this is when we see repeated verbal and physical aggressions. And once again, it's a dog. It's about, don't worry, guys. The dogs know we're almost over. That's why they're acting out. So once again, it's that pervasiveness, that's preventing functioning. And then conduct disorder. And this is where you see, conduct disorder is childhood psychopathology. Okay. This is when they're hurting people, animals, destroying stuff, and just doing everything that human beings should not do. And significant concern to the public. And like I said, I think these are what these mass shooter kids have. And then, of course, we have those neurodevelopmental disorders, ADD, autism can have some of it, some intellectual disabilities, motor and vocal tics, so Tourette's syndrome. And then that leads us to our wrap up, guys. So there is that video. I'll make sure I post it in. I'll post it in the post for us in the actual news and announcement so that you guys can click on it. I definitely recommend watching it. Like I said, these kids are freaky. And get in your discussions, participation. Try to be on time with all of your work. Remember, discussions due Wednesday. You have till Sunday to do your participation. Submit any assignment or quiz that would be due for the week. And don't think of those as the to do dates. Think of those as the last days to get that in. And whenever you're doing any kind of writing assignment, especially those of us that are specifically going into psychology, we always want to have our APA elements included as the support to our research and our words. We always want to write in our own words and then give credit to the researchers and the authors that took the time to write these books and these articles for us to find our own voices. So that's the way you look at APA. We always want to write in 80% our own words, 20%, no more than 20% cited sources. So one citation per paragraph is the simple, most basic way that you can do it. And then you always want to have that full reference on your reference page if you're writing a paper. And then for the discussions, I just say reference list, because you guys notice how I do it when I'm posting. I just kind of have it down at the bottom. So, all right, guys, that wraps up our lecture. Reach out for anything. Keep striving for excellence. I'll see you in the discussions. Silly dogs.